Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Storytime with Uncle Monkey. I am your Uncle Monkey, and today's story is called Hans in Luck. Hans had served his master for 7 years. One day he went up to him and said, "Master, my time of service is up. I'd like to go home to my mother now. Please give me my pay." His master replied, "Well now, you've served me faithfully and honestly. As your service was, so shall your pay be." And he gave Hans a gold nugget that was as big as his head. Hans pulled his handkerchief out of his pocket, wrapped it around the gold nugget, tied it to a stick, slung it over his shoulder, and headed home. As he was walking along, regularly setting one foot down in front of the other and stubbing his toes, he caught sight of a mounted man who was trotting by, hale and happy on a frisky horse. "Oh," said Hans out loud, "how lovely it is to ride! You sit as if you're in a chair, you don't stub your toes on the rocks in the ground, you save your shoe leather, and you get where you want to before you even know it." The horseman, who had heard this, halted and called, "Say, Hans, why are you going on foot yourself?" "I have to," he replied. "I've got a lump to carry home. It's gold, of course, but it doesn't allow me to hold my head up straight and presses on my shoulder something fierce." "You know what?" said the horseman. "Let's trade. I'll give you my horse, and you'll give me your lump." "With great pleasure," said Hans, "but I've got to warn you, it'll make you drag yourself along." The horseman dismounted, took the gold, and helped Hans up, and he placed the reins firmly in Hans's hands and said, "When you want to really go fast, click your tongue and yell, 'Hop to it!'" Hans was tickled pink when he sat on the horse and rode away so boldly and freely. After a while, it occurred to him that he'd be going even faster if he would do what the man said, and he began to click his tongue and yell, "Hop to it! Hop to it!" The horse changed to a lively trot, and before Hans knew it, he had been thrown and was lying in a ditch that separated the fields from the highway. Ow! The horse would have bolted too if it hadn't been stopped by a farmer who was heading that way, driving a cow in front of him. Hans pulled himself together and stood up again, but he was annoyed, and he said to the farmer, "Riding is a bad joke, especially when you find yourself on a mare like this one, which bucks and throws you so you're liable to break your neck. Ugh. Never ever will I ride a horse again. It's what I like about your cow. A person can walk after her at a comfortable pace, and on top of that, he's sure of getting milk, butter, and cheese every day. What I wouldn't give to have a cow like that." "Well," the farmer said, "if it will make you so happy, I'll trade my cow for your horse." Hans agreed with enormous joy. The farmer jumped onto the horse and rode away hastily. Hans drove his cow in front of him peacefully, thinking over the good deal he had made. "If I only have a piece of bread, and I'm sure I'll never lack for that, then I can eat butter and cheese with it as often as I like, and when I'm thirsty, I'll milk the cow and drink the milk. What more could anyone ask for?" When he arrived in an inn, he paused in his journey. In his great joy, he ate every last bit of food he had packed, both his lunch and his supper. And with his last few pennies, he ordered half a glass of beer. Then he drove his cow onward, heading all the while for his mother's village. The heat was growing more oppressive the nearer it was to midday, and Hans found himself on a heath that would probably take an hour or more to cross. He got very hot, so that his tongue was sticking to the roof of his mouth with thirst. "There's a remedy for this," Hans thought. "I'll milk the cow now and refresh myself with the milk." So he tied her to a dead tree, and since he had no pail, he put his leather cap under her. But try as he would, not a drop of milk appeared. And because he was going about it clumsily and impatiently, the animal finally got annoyed and kicked him so hard in the head with one leg that he reeled onto the ground for a while and had no recollection of where he even was. Fortunately, just then a butcher came along pushing a young pig in a wheelbarrow. "What kind of games are these?" he called, and he helped good Hans get up. Hans told him what had occurred. The butcher handed him his bottle, saying, "Take a drink and get your strength back. This cow will probably never give any milk. She's an old animal, and now is only good, at best, for pulling wagons and for slaughtering." My, said Hans, running his hand through his hair. "Who would have thought it? Of course, it's a good thing when you can slaughter such an animal at home. All that meat you get. But if we're being honest, I don't really care much for cow's meat. It's not juicy enough. Yes, if I had a young pig like yours, now there's a flavor for you. Not to mention the sausages. Listen, Hans, the butcher said then, as a favor to you, I'll make a trade and leave you with a pig in the place of the cow. May God reward you for your friendship, said Hans. He handed over the cow, had the young pig untied from the wheelbarrow, and took hold of the cord it was tied to. Hans moved on, reviewing in his mind the way everything was going, according to his wishes. Whenever he experienced any vexation or trouble, it was set right again immediately. Later on, he was joined by a youngster who was carrying a beautiful white goose under her arm. They greeted each other, and Hans began telling about his good luck and the series of advantageous trades he had made. The youngster told him that she was taking the goose to a christening party. Just lift it, she continued, grabbing it by the wings, and see how heavy it is. It's been fattened for 8 weeks. That's why whoever bites into it when it's roasted will have to wipe fat away from both sides of their mouth. Oh, it's going to be a delicious meal. Yes, said Hans, weighing it in one hand. It's good and heavy, but my pig is nothing to sneeze at either. Meanwhile, the youngster was looking around in every direction and with a most serious expression on her face, and was shaking her head sadly. Listen, she began to say, things may not be quite right with your pig. In the village that I just walked through, one has just been stolen from the mayor's pen. I'm afraid you've got it there in your hand. They've sent people out, you know, and it would be bad if they caught you with the pig. At the very least, you'll be thrown into the black dungeon. Good Hans got frightened. My heavens, he said, help me out of my distress in these parts, for you know your way around better than I do. Here, take my pig and leave me your goose. I'd be taking a risk, the youngster replied, but I don't want to be to blame for your getting in trouble. So she took the rope in her hand and quickly drove the pig off onto a side path, while Hans, relieved of his worries, walked on homeward with the goose under his arm. When I think it over carefully, he said to himself, the trade is still to my advantage. First of all, the good roast and all that fat will trickle out of it, which will provide enough goose fat to smear onto bread slices for 3 months. And finally, the beautiful white feathers I'll be able to stuff into my pillow so I can fall asleep on it without being rocked. How happy my mother will be. When he had crossed the last village, a scissor grinder was standing there at his cart. His wheel was humming, and he was singing to its accompaniment. I turn my wheel and knife I grind it, and trim my sails to the wind as I find it. Hans halted and watched him. Finally addressed him, saying, You must be doing all right, because you're so jolly while you grind. Yes, the scissors grinder replied. This trade is very profitable. An honest-to-goodness scissors grinder is a man who finds money in his pocket every time he reaches his hand in. But where did you buy such a beautiful goose? I didn't buy it. I traded my pig for it. And the pig? I got that for a cow. And the cow? I received the cow for a horse. And the horse? I gave a lump of gold as big as my head. And the gold? Oh, that was my pay for 7 years' service. Each time you manage to get ahead, said the scissors grinder. If you can do so well now that you hear money jingling in your pocket every time you stand up, your happiness will be complete. How do I do that? Hans asked. You must become a scissors grinder like me. All you actually need for it is a grindstone. The rest you can get anywhere. I have one here that's a little damaged, I admit, So all you need to give me is your goose. Are you willing?" "How can you even ask?" Hans replied. "I'll be the luckiest person on earth if I have money whenever I reach my hand into my pocket. What more do I have to worry about?" He handed the scissors grinder the goose and received the grindstone. "Now," said the scissors grinder, picking up an ordinary heavy rock that was lying next to him, "here you have in addition a fine stone that's good to beat on when you're straightening out all your old bent nails. Take it and guard it well." Hans loaded the rock onto the grindstone and went on his way with a contented heart, his eyes beaming with joy. "I must have been born under a lucky star," he exclaimed. "Everything I wish for comes to me as if I were Sunday's child." Meanwhile, because he had been on his feet since daybreak, he began to feel tired. Also, he was tormented by hunger because in his joy over receiving the cow, he had eaten all of his food. Finally, he could only keep walking with difficulty, and he had to stop every minute. Besides, the stones were weighing him down mercilessly. He couldn't resist the thought of how good it would be if he didn't have to carry them around anymore. Like a snail, he crawled over to a well in a field, intending to rest there and refresh himself with a cool drink. He placed the stones down carefully on the side of the well, up on the rim, just so they wouldn't get broken. Then he sat down, heaved a sigh, and he was about to raise up the bucket and get a drink of water when he became careless, and he shoved the stones slightly, but it was enough. They both sank over the edge of the well and sploosh into the water. They were gone. When Hans saw them disappear into the depths with his own eyes, he jumped for joy, and he knelt down and thanked God with tears in his eyes for showing him mercy and for freeing him of the heavy stones, the only things that had still been hindering him, and for doing it in such a kind way, so that he had nothing to reproach himself for. There's no one under the sun as lucky as I am," he exclaimed. Light of heart and free of every burden, he now dashed onward until he was home with his mother. The end.